Hello, everybody. We're calling to order the Tuesday, August 8th meeting of the Budget Task Force. It is 12:33. Thanks, everybody, for coming on this sort of different day. And I guess we'll dive right into the minutes. So if you were all able to see Dan's email a few days ago, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 documents were attached. One of them for July 5th, July 5th and July 12th are just for the budget challenges and new revenue group. Do you guys want to do that vote separate?
I have a comment. It looked like there were 2 for the 5th. They were a little different. I don't know. Do you want to pick one?
Sure, let me put it on the screen.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I saw that, Erica. There was a couple, nothing of substance changed, but just edits between the two. But the file names were different, so I wondered if one of them was supposed to be the full task force from the 5th.
Yeah.
So according to Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, but they want the subgroups broken out from the main group and have separate minutes. That was the town clerk's preference. So
yeah, that's what I was instructed to do.
okay. So I would make a motion to approve minutes of July 5th for the budget challenges and new revenue subcommittee.
So the ones shown, not the other set.
The one shown, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
And then a second from
Yeah, second.
great. Erica,
Aye.
Shayna. Oh no, you're a little lag behind. And Dan.
Yes.
Okay, so those will be approved. Sorry, I guess Dr. Chu, you probably abstain. You weren't there.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So do you want to skip there would be a set for the full committee on July 5th, but I didn't see those on the email, so we can move on to July 12th. There was only one version of that, so unless there was discussion or comments, we probably can skip pulling them up on the screen. Okay, so that was July 12th for just the budget challenges and new revenue. Any motion to approve those?
Yeah.
Okay, Shayna, and a second.
Second.
Thanks. Okay, that all in favor, that's Shayna. Sorry, you're first on my screen. Erica.
Aye.
Dr. Chu.
Aye.
And Dan.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so now we're on to July 12th full committee, which was an attachment. Did everyone have a chance to look at those? Any comments or suggestions? Thought they looked great. Okay, a motion for those.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Christina, and a second. I missed who that was. Shayna. Okay.
Shayna.
Okay, all in favor, Shayna?
Aye.
Myself as an aye. Dan?
Yes.
Jenny? Oh, you're on mute, Jenny.
Aye.
Thanks. Kristen?
Aye.
Christina?
Aye.
And Erica?
Aye.
Dr. Chu?
Aye.
And Vibhu?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, so then we're on to July 19th for the full committee. Any comments, discussion on those? Great. Okay, a motion and
Move to approve.
thank you.
Second.
A second. Great. And all in favor, Shayna?
Aye.
Dan?
Yes.
Jenny?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Christina?
Aye.
Erica?
Aye.
Dr. Chu?
I'm going to abstain. I didn't participate.
And Vibhu?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. It's unanimous. And now we're on July 24th, right? So it's the open forum for the full committee. They looked good to me. Any other comments on there? Not seeing any. Great. Motion.
So moved.
Thank
Second.
you. Thank you.
Second.
Shayna,
Aye.
Dan,
Yes,
Jenny,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Christina,
Aye.
Erica,
Aye.
Dr. Chu,
I'll abstain for this one too.
Vibhu.
Aye.
Thank you, and I'm an I. Great. We probably could have done some of those as a bucket, but because there was subcommittees and stuff, I wanted to make sure we did them correctly. So maybe for the next meeting, we can do July 5th full committee, if there's a set of those. Thanks. Okay, so we can move on to prepare for the update to the joint select board, finance committee and school committee meeting, which is scheduled for next Tuesday, August 15th at 7 p.m. I assume that's a hybrid format. And I think this is really the first time this has been on the agenda to start hashing out. So I'm just going to open it up if we want to talk about sort of what we think the goal of that meeting is, what kind of slides maybe from the forum still make sense, or what to add on to there. I don't know if Kristen and Dan, sometimes you kind of have something seated, so I'll let you, and you've unmuted, which is the signal that you have something to say. So go ahead.
Sure. So the select board is looking forward to receiving an update from the budget task force. I think one select board member was able to attend virtually last time. I'm not sure if the others, with the exception of Thomas, as he's on this committee, were able to watch the tape. I think it will be a hybrid format. So school committee and finance committee members are able to attend either there or in person or hybrid. Same with this group. We should discuss today who might be there in person, who might not be there in person, just so we can talk about presentation. Dan and I did have a brief conversation about, using the public forum slides as a launching point and discussing at this meeting today what should stay or what should go. I think that we should be targeting at about a 10 to 15 minute presentation and then allowing for about 10 minutes of questions and answers. There might be more because there will be school committee and finance committee members as well. So I'm still trying to feel out the timing of how much we should allot for on the agenda, but I can certainly adjust that after we all talk today. So we can certainly bring up the presentation on the screen and go through it slide by slide, or welcome any comments or questions based upon feedback. I think some of the work that has been done to date since the public forum is Christina and others from the benchmarking group have continued to hold department head meetings. And Christina and I have participated in several outside municipal meetings related to town questions. I don't know if Valerie's been entertaining school department questions with either principals or administration or with other municipalities. So that's really what's new on our end. Dan, do you want to just update what might be new from the other subcommittee, and then we can go from there?
sure. So Shannon and Tom did go through all of their the revenue. They have those in pretty good shape, and they're in the final report. So we could take a look at that slide and see if we want to update it at all, just based on the current information. And with regard to the budget challenges, I pull up that slide. We still have ranges in here for the most part, which I think we still need going into Tuesday night, because some of the information is sensitive as to collective bargaining and whatnot. So we don't want to get too specific here. Also on Tuesday night, we have the solid waste and recycling contract actually being presented to the select board. That will be something that will be good to stick around for, to see those figures and the impacts from that. So really not too many changes on what occurred on the 24th. But yeah, we can certainly take a look and make sure it's updated.
Great, thanks for that context setting. I think that's a good point, Kristen, you raised that we'll be hearing from, getting that feedback from select board members, FinCom members, and school committee members with this. So it will be, it's kind of a slightly different but similar goal to hearing from residents. That was our sort of original plan with the forum. And you answered my other question, which was, is it a regular select board meeting or a separate meeting? So it is just part of their agenda. Are we on there for right at 7, do you know, or?
It's probably 7:05 or 7:10. We have an executive session at 6:40, and then some consent agenda items, and then we'll go right into that. So
Okay.
we did try to get you all up front, just because it is such a joint meeting. We want to make sure everybody's in and out at the top part of the meeting.
Okay. Great. Then why don't we just, before we dive into the slides, see who is planning to be there in person next Tuesday night. So if you, I'm sorry, Christina, in person in Westford. Oh my gosh.
Yes. Yes. Yep, flying back Thursday.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, I looked down to take that note, and so Kristen, Dan, I assume, Shayna's in person, Erica is planning to be, Jenny, and Dr. Chu, are you virtual that night?
I was planning to be virtual, yeah.
Okay. Vibhu, are you available virtual or in person?
Yeah, I will be virtual.
Virtual, okay, thanks. Okay, and I'm in person. I realize I just didn't say that. Okay, great. Sorry. If you want to switch back to the slides, we can go through that. Oh, Shayna, go ahead.
Just thinking on that slide, Dan's bringing them back up. I think it would be nice at the bottom to total the guesstimate.
Of the budget challenges.
Yeah, because I think it'll be a little bit more impactful.
Yeah,
If it's like bolded in your face at the bottom, that is like all equals,
8 to 10.
you know, $8 to $10
Mhm.
million.
Yeah, I agree.
I
Dan,
think-
we just see your background. We don't see the slides, just so you know.
But it's a very nice background.
Thank you. Let me redo this.
While he's doing that, can I just?
Yep. Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, Valerie, I thought you had a good idea to just talk about what our goals are for the meeting. I don't know if there's anything that we want to make sure gets through to these committees that wasn't necessarily a focus for our public briefing. Like, is there something that we should be thinking about as we do this? I can't say that I have the answer to that, but I thought it was a good way to kind of frame our viewing of these charts, you know, to say, is there something new or unique that we want to make sure that from their perspective that they would want to know, and from our perspective that we need them to know, that might not be the true for the public.
I think a great question for us to ponder. Shayna?
I was thinking, and I don't know what the appetite of the committee here is, but I feel like we don't have enough time to really dive into the things that I think that we want to as a committee. And so I feel, in my opinion, like we should maybe be discussing, like, we deliver the report on October 1st. That will be like a higher level report, but that there may be some action items that we want to continue to follow up on after that, like diving into a handful of efficiencies or a handful of the revenue pieces that we just aren't going to have enough time to look at. And so I wanted to bring that up with the group today. If other people felt similarly, then maybe that's a seed we want to be planting in this meeting to say, like, hey, I believe at the very beginning when we first met as a group, we all agreed we wanted to be more specific in our recommendations than the Hingham report was. And I kind of feel like we don't have the time to do that at this juncture, given that we have, 6 weeks or so to start finalizing a report. And so I think that we should be discussing or recommending potentially that we deliver a high level report for October 1st, and then that we have some presentation of the things that we may want to spend a little bit more time diving into after that report. So I don't know what other people's thoughts are on that.
I think that could be helpful. As well, like I'm sure one of the slides is sort of next steps and timelines. So if there's, like you said, if there's other members that agree with that plan, that's kind of where we would plant that seed with the committees that we're presenting to. Dr. Chu?
I was just going to say that I think, one of the differences here than the public discussion is the fact that all three of these boards have representation on this committee, right? On this task force, right? So so it's a little bit different, right? And they all know that we're doing this, so they know what we're doing. So I do feel like there is a layer of just an update as to where we are piece of this as opposed to needing to get to the end result yet. They just want to know because they want to be informed as to where we are in this journey. And so I feel like in that regard, it's more about providing them time to ask us questions about what they might be curious about that we're not saying yet. So we might want to have more time for them to ask us questions than worrying about whether we use the same slides or any adjustments that we use to the slides.
Okay, thanks. Christina?
A few things. I would definitely agree about planting a seed as far as continuing past October, because I agree with Shayna that there may just not be enough time for some of this. I can pretty much guarantee finance committee members are going to have quite a few questions, because I think they did last time we did this, or last time we did something similar. And then I don't know how this fits into it, but some of the efficiencies that have sort of been coming across in my research are going to take, they're going to take a quite a bit of work to actually figure out whether they're even going to save us anything and what the difficulty or, you know, anything might be to actually implementing them. And they may actually take the select board to make more of a policy type of decision. So there's kind of a lot of pieces going on with those.
Okay. Yeah, so I think those are good points. I think that you're right that some of the members of these three boards, to your point and to Kristen's point, have probably been watching the forum or watching some of our meetings. Hi, John. So I think that you know, it's a lot of it's like an update of what we've been working on, but to the point of leaving time for questions, I think can be really, really powerful. So does it make sense to step through the slides then and just kind of see if there's anything we can trim, or does anyone remember or took a note of how long it took us through the slides at the forum?
It was over 30 minutes.
Yeah, it was quite a while.
Over 30 for
Yeah.
the slides? Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
We don't need that then.
No, the select board will not, they have business to get to after us. So, I mean, yeah.
I would
mean,
think we don't
probably
need to
have to do
read through,
introduction.
yeah, the task force members of the charge, because obviously they set the charge.
Yeah, and we could move members to, like, you know, an FYI last slide or something. It's because I think we took time going around and doing introductions. Someone's trying to talk. Sorry, I can't see.
Sorry, that's me. And honestly, I think just thinking about the slide that I did with the list of towns, I don't think I need to, or anybody really, I think they're familiar with those lists.
Yeah, and like these three boards have had budget discussions, and even you know, a recent executive session that talked about how we use those towns as benchmarking. So maybe it's not its own slide, right? Or it's in like backup or something. And then we can just maybe dive into what, slide 6, Dan? I mean, I would propose that we kind of dive right into, or maybe there's just a slide between that says like a reminder of our two subcommittees, and like sort of those, how we broke out. So budget challenges and new revenue, and then benchmarking and efficiencies, and then could dive right into these finer detail. Erica?
I just want to point out for this subcommittee, this committee, the tool that I've created, and I did send it, I think, last week or the week before to onto Dan, but and it can still be made prettier, but I did plug in these budget challenges, the numbers here, and so just as a reminder, what this tool does is it reflects the fact that all of these are ranges and we're not likely to end up with all of them pegged at bad or all of them pegged at good. They're probably going to be a mixture of them. And it just tries to fish out what the most likely impact is going to be. So just a very roughly, it came out more towards the 8 million than the 10 million. And I can show that a little bit more, but that's a rough thing right now, but I just wanted everyone to know that, because obviously that's what we're going to have to deal with is what the right number is. And then what the amount of extra, how much extra are we going to put on top of that to account for the fact that, things could go worse than hoped for. So anyway, and at some point, and Dan, I'm hoping that I can meet with you probably next week, because I'm going to be out of town this week, just to kind of go over those budget challenges, just to make sure that I've got the data right. But
that'd be great, because I couldn't download the tool. So if we try in a different format or something, that'd be great. So.
Okay, great.
We may also want to adjust for this audience is that we were asked to give kind of a 5-year type before, or at least 3 years, right? So we see these challenges for fiscal 25. What do we see as reoccurring challenges for 26, 27 and beyond? Or is there anything on the horizon that we're not thinking of that's going to be in 26, 27 and beyond? I think this audience would benefit from that information.
Great point. I saw some hands go up. Shayna?
I just wanted to say, I think we should still touch on the task force website and the form, even though the committee obviously knows that they exist, these committees. I think just if there's anybody watching from the general public that isn't aware, it would be nice to reinforce that we have that website and that form. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And it depends on, it's either, to me, the beginning or the end, right? Like, because when we talk about next steps of public engagement and people still participating in the process, I think it could go there too, but good point. Christina?
Sort of to Kristen's point about the 3-year outlook, we were also tasked with looking at capital, which I don't think we've really done, at least I haven't.
Also a good point.
We do have the 5-year capital plan from fiscal 24 that projects out. And Dan and I are starting up meetings related to capital moving forward, and we'll be getting some budget data. So I think we can probably put that as a to-do on this slide to inform the committees that we'll be looking at that.
Maybe capture it in like a next step, but acknowledge that this committee as a whole hasn't chewed on that yet. So Erica, I appreciate the update on the model, and I know that you are reminding us that your term wraps up at the end of August. So I want to balance that with, I think that level of detail in introducing that model at this Tuesday meeting might be too much. And I think that like the ranges, I'm happy to discuss that if someone else disagrees, but I think these ranges are really what we're, the level of detail that we're kind of aiming for still. And then maybe we're more comfortable with the simulation and introducing that for the strategic retreat or the next update after that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So is there a way maybe we could like asterisk the ones that we think would be recurring versus on this slide, or, split them, or would all of, to your point, Kristen, about what's recurring and what's just for FY25? We may want to think about that on this slide.
Well, yeah, if things are baked into the budget, they'll obviously be baked in. There's really no room for cutting these in the future budgets. I'm more thinking of what might be coming up in the future as well that could then have to get baked in as well. Or what are we cutting? What might we be cutting this year that we might have to bring back, or something like that?
Okay. Christina?
So I'm still talking to Steve Cronin from DPW on Wednesday, but in his initial response to me, he did mention some potential upcoming, which may just affect the water department now that I'm thinking about it, but he did indicate some things kind of coming down the line from the EPA. But I can look through my notes and see if any of the department heads said anything else. I don't recall anything else.
It's a great point to tie that into any more interviews that we have, right? Is not to just be solely focused on FY25 and what does anyone know about, what do these department heads know about anything else in the future? So I appreciate that. Do we want to move on to new revenue opportunities slide? This still sort of applies, but maybe we could group by impact.
Yeah,
Sounds
we
like-
added ambulance fees since we had this slide.
Okay, so you've got a few more to add maybe.
That's, I think, the predominant one that we added.
And I think just knowing sort of the level of information of the elected officials will be presenting to that, you know, some people will obviously see right away, which have higher impact than others. But I think that was one evolution of this information that might be helpful.
Yeah, I think Tom and I, well, at least for mine, I think we haven't fully ranked them yet. I think Tom's still waiting on some of the areas. So I'm happy to take a stab and send some $sign notations over to Dan that we could add here. I think there's some of them are in the document already, Dan.
Yeah, I haven't looked yet, but even just like high impact and medium or lower, you know what I mean? If you're not comfortable getting to ranges yet, I don't want to push you there, but I think it looks promising as a big list, but we know that some of them
Yeah,
are.
it's not, no, it's not promising. Not,
I think
not-
also to Christina's point about the efficiencies, some of these are going to take a lot longer than others, like MBTA zoning. If that passes in the spring, we probably won't realize the efficiencies or the revenue of that for another 3 years.
Okay.
Real estate transfer fees, if it has to go to the state for approval, that's probably a 2-year thing. So maybe bucketing them also by the timing that we would realize
Sure.
these revenues.
Right, like impact and speed or something like that, feasibility. Great, and Shani, you don't mind trying to take a stab at that with Dan or sending something?
Yeah, I can try to take a stab, at least at reordering them.
Okay,
I
Thanks.
don't necessarily think we need to like read through them all unless someone disagrees, because I would have presumed that this predominant audience knows what these all basically are. So I think just a high level and maybe which ones we think are most impactful.
right. You could
Potentially,
pick 2 or 3 that from your high impact category to maybe overview. Oh, sorry, Eric, I missed your hand is blending in with your background.
Oh, of course, of course. Yeah, just 2 things. One, I think it's important that since we did hold a public forum with the whole purpose of trying to solicit public input, that we reflect both the regionalization and the privatization of ambulance that Dennis brought up. Since we did reach out to the public.
Yep.
And
I don't know if we'd want to single out just one piece of public feedback we received, because we've also received a lot of feedback from the surveys or the online form. So I wonder if we could bucket the public feedback into one slide that's, you know, kind of more encompassing of everyone's feedback that we've received, not just in the public forum. I'm not trying to discount that one piece of feedback, because it is great that people came and shared their information. But I don't know if we want to
Maybe
highlight
it's-
that.
it might be, I think it might be interesting if, you know, if there are a lot of, or I mean, if there are ones that we got, just to see how the list looks, if we try to include all of them, and then that could be a good reason for not going through every single one. But if we, you know, just have them all on a screen, I think that does 2 things: to say, hey, there's a lot that's out there. And then there's also the the fact that people can look at that and say, hey, I had an impact. I'm making a difference. People are listening to me. And they're going to see all these charts as well. So I think both those reasons, we could consider whatever we got from the public being up there. And I do just want to point out that, the public forum was very public, right? I mean, it was on television and people have been viewing it. So, at least showing those, I think, would be showing that we're taking this public feedback thing seriously. We're not, just lip service. Like we're soliciting the input and then we're seriously considering the input.
And I would say too, that like, if it has turned into an investigation, if a submission or an input has turned into like the same level of research that was on these lists of ideas that we sort of were inspired by Hingham or thought of ourselves, then to me, it could go on this list. It just doesn't need to be called out as, like you said, where it came from. But go ahead, Sheena.
I also think that Dennis's suggestions of that, well, we all know that that's where they came from, was public forum, are more on the efficiency list, which we don't really have in a solid state at this point versus revenue, right? They're not really a revenue opportunity. They're a efficiency and money saving potential opportunity. And I don't think that we addressed yet like the real list of efficiencies, because I don't think we really know what they are yet.
Okay.
So that would be my comment about that specific piece of feedback. Is it not sure that we have a spot for it quite yet in where we're developed.
Okay.
I mean, I agree. We want to make sure that everybody knows we're looking at what they've said, but it doesn't really belong here. So either we would need to look at more efficiencies or we would need to address it in a different way, I think.
Okay.
Or rename this as new revenues and efficiencies.
Well, let's step through the next couple and see how our chat on the existing efficiency slide goes. Christina, did you want to add something?
Just that I kind of agree with Shayna that the ambulance question probably is a little bit more of an efficiency, and that we may not be there yet for next week. But I do sort of like the idea of at least acknowledging the fact that we have gotten input from residents and that we're considering it. However that lands on a slide or how that really shakes out. I think that is probably a good idea.
Okay. Noted. Thank you. Dan, you want to step to the next slide? See what we get with benchmarking. Would benchmarking, I mean, is there, like you said, whoever said earlier that this audience may already know these lists and sort of how they exist and stuff, but is there something we can say that we've what could we say about what we've done sort of as the next step with the benchmarking? So would this be where we could mention that interviews are happening? Go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, I would think so. Again, I don't think we need to go through the lists and why we chose these two. I would still keep this slide in here for their information.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this might be the place to talk about the department head meetings and the meetings with other communities.
Okay.
I guess we have that little comment down in the corner.
Yeah, I guess we could
So
almost get rid of the bullets, because I feel like this audience knows that we have these lists and how they were chosen by population and geography and school district performance and stuff. So just kind of saying like that this subcommittee has been analyzing data from benchmarking municipalities and is pursuing conversations, and the rest of that sentence at the bottom. Yep, Dr. Chu.
I was just going to say, I do think though that the data that we're collecting has gone beyond when we talked about the school district benchmarking, we talked in terms with the three groups in terms of salary comparisons, right? So like that but we're actually collecting much more information, and those bullets are there, but I feel like there might just be room as we're talking about, I think Christina was just saying this, like how we're using this. Yes, we know that we have these two historic, this, I think it makes sense as to why we're using them, but just to let people know additionally some examples of the data that we're collecting. And like, I think the point of the conversations and the interviews, those are the things that are the most important thing for them to get out of this.
Okay. Thank you. You want to flip to the next one, Dan? Okay, so efficiencies. And if we're, yeah, I mean, here's where we can sort of have that conversation we've been mentioning, which is, are we ready to list some? If not, what kind of information would go here? Does anybody have thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, I'm not 100% sure what should really be put on this slide at this point, because I feel like most of the ideas that are sort of surfacing, I've been the only one or one of the only people that really have eyes on it. So I hate to throw things on a slide without at least us as a committee discussing it. And I don't know that this morning is the place to do that. I did, when Tom asked me during the public forum, what kinds of things were coming up. I think the two things I talked about were sort of centralizing facilities into one department, because that seemed to be what a lot of other communities did. And the same with vehicle maintenance. But whether that would really save us any money, honestly, I don't know. It may be easier, it may be a little more efficient, but what are we talking about in terms of savings? I really have no idea.
Yeah, and I think to Christina's point is that, our benchmarking and efficiency subcommittee has a laundry list of potential efficiencies. And like she said, efficiencies don't always mean cost saving. So when I put this slide together, it says to be effective in providing the best services for our residents, businesses, and visitors. It doesn't necessarily saying providing the lowest cost services. So I think these were the 4 buckets that are starting to develop in terms of potential efficiencies. But again, it doesn't mean cost efficiencies. It's just efficiencies in general. And we have some more detailed sentences or language in the subcommittee that we're working at, but it's a little too soon to tell if any of those efficiencies could offset any of the costs that we need to supplement with the budget.
The other thing is that we haven't talked about any sort of reduction in service level, and if we're going to go there at all. It's probably a little too early because we don't really have numbers on anything existing yet on the revenue or the efficiency side, but I guess just a thought that popped into my head, and as I've been talking to department heads, of course they're concerned about what is potentially going to happen. So I don't know how we just kind of give that. Maybe we don't need to give the heads up. Maybe the 8 to 10 million is enough to this board to kind of give them a little clue that.
Yeah, we're setting the stage for big hard changes. Yeah, Sheena. I'm sorry, Dr. Chu.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I feel like, again, this meeting, I believe, is really to let them know where we are at this moment in time. So I really agree with what Christina was saying, that we want them to know that we're examining and we're looking at efficiencies, and we will have things to share with them in the future, because we don't want them to think that we're just looking at those at the other aspects of it. But you're right, the committee hasn't talked about a lot of these things yet. So so I feel like that, again, is another reminder that we're talking about a snapshot in time for them right now, giving them the chance to ask us questions if there's things that they want to know more about, so that we have, so that we can do that work before the final report, but then the idea of letting them know about shifts that we're making, like if it's going to take longer than October, if we need to change any of the potential expectations that we had. But you're right, when we get into listing things that we haven't got there yet. So we're just letting
Right.
them know that that's the next step.
Right. I almost wonder, sorry to Shana, I know you have your hand up too, but I almost wonder about combining slides 8 and 9 and saying, because I know they're separate sort of works, but a lot of it did start to come out of the benchmarking data. And if we don't have a ton, like it's not like the new revenue and the budget challenges where like there's this list that's ready, right? So maybe it just makes sense to be like, you know, there's benchmarking happening, there's interviews happening, and we expect that some type of efficiencies might be identified through this process.
I think sorry to jump in again, but I think that the sentence that Kristen has put there, I think is fantastic. You know what I mean? Like you could still say that's what we are looking at. What
Yeah.
can schools do collectively so that they know that this is our focus and this is our charge. But you're right, we don't give them a specific list of efficiencies yet.
Okay. Yeah. Shana?
I was just gonna say, aside from figuring out what we want to do for this meeting, I think that we should prioritize diving into this conversation, probably maybe even next week on our agenda, to start to figure out like what are the high level list of things that the efficiency and benchmarking group have started to note, and see if maybe we need to assign some of that. Well, because there's only so much conversations that group can do, like maybe the rest of us can start helping to look into some of those efficiencies and start assigning them out.
Mhm.
And then I think like what a framework might be for how we want to list them in the document. Because we definitely are starting to get tight on time. So I feel like we need to dive into this more deeply. So I don't know if we want to put a chunk of time dedicated to this for next week.
Okay. Good point.
And maybe that's part of what we can talk about in the meeting, right? Is that we're just starting to get to the point to discuss them more in depth, and we're hoping in the next coming weeks to have a better framework.
Okay. Let's go on to slide 10. Does this still apply? How do people feel about sort of our timeline? The next like 3 or 4 slides are about sort of outline, timeline, next steps. And with the goal of trimming our presentation talk time, how can we share the information that's in these 4 slides a little bit more efficiently? Christina?
I'm sort of feeling like this group probably understands what these steps are. And so, you know, maybe they're in the presentation just to give a fuller picture. But I don't know that we really
Like
need to
backup.
talk about them unless they have questions.
Yeah, I think perhaps we just breeze through this slide and put it up, because there will be members of the public watching. So we
Mhm.
want to make sure we're getting to them at that angle, but we don't necessarily have to talk to all these bullet points or boxes.
I think that makes sense. And I would argue the same about, or even as in backup for report outline. And just try to get to sort of a quick mention of what's next, right? I think Dr. Chu is doing a great job aligning us to sort of what these audience needs to hear, right? And where we're at, and what we're working on next, not necessarily getting to the meat of it. And I think the purpose of the forum was really to share, maybe this is the first time someone had been following what a task force would work on, and trying to understand that we're not just jumping to one preconceived, you know, solution or something. So I think that was really good ground setting for the forum, but we could probably skip a lot of this back for Tuesday. Go ahead, Christina.
I think my only other comment would be that, and this may be coming up, but looking ahead to the strategic retreat, I could see this group kind of wanting to know what our plans are for that meeting.
Okay, great. Thanks for that segue. Were you peeking at the agenda?
No.
Dan, can you just scroll down and see if we're missing anything else major there? It's just next steps. Okay, yeah. So I think that if you want to take those down and we can just chat too about what the retreat looks like, and we can work that into like that last slide of next steps. And then that would be our slide deck for Tuesday. And I'm happy to sort of take my stab at rewording some of the things we've talked about, Dan, so that it's not just on you to make those edits. But yeah, so let's open it up to talking through the strategic planning retreat, September 7th. Kristen, can you remind us, I know there's been some conversation at the select board meetings about what the select board would like to see at the retreat and what the format they think might work best and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And had a kind of a team meeting this morning with staff to finalize as well. We're going to head over to the site tomorrow. So again, the strategic retreat will be Thursday, September 7th, starting at 5 o'clock for registration. We envision welcome remarks from Tom Clay, who's the chair of the select board. He's also on this committee. And I'll probably say a few things as well. And I think what we had talked about at our last budget task force meeting was that we would all be breaking out into groups, probably about 6 to 7 people per picnic table, getting feedback and comments. We didn't talk about what that feedback and comments would be, if it would be based upon what we'd presented at the listening session, or if we be based on something else. Dan and Eric Heidemann have much more experience in this strategic retreat than I do. And I think noise and ambient conversations has been the biggest concern I've heard from staff as well as members of the public. So we don't see it being as, a presentation to the whole group. We see it kind of more as table discussions, but I think this group needs to hone in on what those table discussions will be. What's the right number of people per table? How many facilitators do we have? We have not sent out the save the date yet, so we don't have an RSVP. There'll only be one other session going on as well, the MBTA communities multifamily zoning. And we think that this will kind of back to back each other pretty well if they have their breakout group session at the same time we do, and then everybody just switches. So there'd be 2 things for participants to attend, and then being called up to dinner at certain periods of time based upon how that works. So that's kind of the logistics. Again, I have not participated, so I'm trying to take as much feedback as I can from everyone who has participated in the past, but that was the general direction that has been given by the select board members at their most recent meeting.
Thanks for that. Go ahead, Erica.
My feeling about the retreat is that this is, I know we have a public forum after that, but this is really, I think, given that it's September, it's already, almost mid-September, we're getting pretty close to having to put out a report, and the draft report is probably going to be due the following week, right? I mean, if we're really going to work through those dates. We, at that point, will hopefully have some of those scenarios that we've been tasked to provide, or at least a notion of them. What we have to do is, I think, and I think Tom suggested this at our forum, was, we'll lay out potential scenarios in which we're going to be able to have current level service or better down to less service, because we have to pay for it and the efficiencies and the new revenues don't cover it, right? If we want to avoid springing that on the public in our report, this is the time to socialize them to difficult questions. If we have any of those scenarios in place, it might be worthwhile to get public feedback on, do you want more services? Or, do you want status quo, but a little higher taxes? Do you, what's your appetite here for service versus tax, right? I mean, really putting some specifics ideally in front of them, and potentially socializing them to this difficult question. Where do we go from here? We need to know. I think we have to view September not so much as a listening session for generic grand ideas. At that point, we're really getting down to brass tacks. We're getting close to having to deliver. And at that point, we should be asking harder questions of the public. And I would say that at these tables, we can have some very pointed questions that, either you tackle at different tables or you've got a list of questions and the people at the table might say, I want to talk about this because this really, sings to me. I have an opinion on this question here, but it's a specific one. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks, Erica. Vivu?
What just Erica you mentioned, I feel the job for us is to come with the recommendation, not for taking decisions. And that's where I agree with you, like by 15 September, we should be ready. But our objective should be to share those options, not to talk about like whether what they agree with. That's my understanding. I might be wrong, but my understanding is that's a decision which school committee or select board or finance committee are going to take, which options they want to go for. And creating public opinion about it is their job. Am I right or wrong? I don't know.
It's like the chicken or the egg.
Yes.
Chicken and the egg, I think. It's,
It's just about where we want, what our key task is versus suppose school, that's a decision which school committee need to take, what recommendation they go for, or they might come up with some other approach also. So that's how I think. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing. I like how Erica phrased it as like avoiding sort of how to balance this with a surprise, right? We don't want sort of to bury the lead at the strategic retreat and then have a report come out. But I think it's going to be a timing question too. What's ready for then and not. Dr. Chu?
I think in taking kind of all those ideas, I do think it's important that we have a collective elevator speech that we have written out so that there is a certain script at each table, whether it's questions that we're gathering feedback on, whether it's a list of potential recommendations. I do feel, I agree with Erica that I feel like September 7th is a little late in the game for us to be getting brand new ideas from the general public for us to then research and think through. So to me, it's more about figuring out how can we be, if we're going to be at different tables talking to different people, I do think for the purposes of our message, whether it's our job to be informing them ahead of time or whether we're just trying to explain the work that we've been doing, I feel like the more scripted it can be for each group of people at each table, the better. And starting with a quick elevator speech, as to this is where we are, this is where we've come to. We certainly don't have to go through any of those slides that we've already been talking about, but there will be people at this retreat who will have no idea that we even existed.
Mm-hmm.
So it is important for us to have like a 30-second, 1 minute thing that everybody can say, this is the timeline. I do think it would be helpful if we said, whether it's scenarios or whether it's recommendations or just getting their sense as to how they feel about things, does sort of get that survey information out there. And we can also include that in our final report, because you're right. Once we do have our recommendations, for some people are going to be like, well, where the heck did that come from? Where did these recommendations come from?
Yeah, no, I especially like the emphasis you have on like the scripting thing, right? Because we depending on who's available that day, we will probably all be at a table individually, if not maybe doubled up or something, and to build that confidence to know that I'm saying the same thing that Christina's saying and Jenny's saying and whoever. So yeah, I think that could be a good tool. Christina?
I was just thinking along those same lines, because I had the same idea that we all need to sort of at least springboard the discussion on the same note. And depending on how this works, I'm almost wondering if it would work if Tom or somebody sort of gave that initially. So you're hearing it from one person and then the smaller conversations start. But I don't know how that works logistically in that tent setting.
Right.
We were talking about the exact same thing this morning. One of our staff members had that suggestion. So we're going to go over tomorrow and see how that may or may not work. Maybe at the opening remarks, those comments are made for both budget task force and for MBTA communities. They just have to remember, we might have to say it again when we're switching groups or say it again, but that's a really beneficial comment.
I think just on experience of participating in it, the main problem that everybody has is that ambient noise. And the reality is that people sitting at those tables don't stop talking. So I think both is great. Having one voice say something at the beginning, maybe with a little bit more details, but then if we still have like I said, the 30-second or the minute long sound bites, so that we can say, like you heard earlier, blah, 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 because they won't listen. The only other thing I wanted to say quickly was that if it's possible, I think our organization of our two smaller subcommittees, having representation from towns and schools and the different work that's been done, if it is possible for us to have enough people where we could have two people at each table, maybe one from each group, that might really help everybody, you know, because this way someone isn't also the island. And I will say, people signed up to be on this task force. Everyone knows I clearly have no problem talking, right? But like, I have no problem doing that. But I would say that people signed up to be on the task force to work collaboratively. They didn't necessarily sign up to give presentations. So if we can couple up people, the better.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah. Go ahead, Erica.
I think it might be worthwhile just considering what our goal is coming out of the retreat, and I would suggest that there may be two. One is just to let people feel heard. I think that's important, especially when it's something as touchy as their taxes or their services, so that they feel heard. They're going to see their comments potentially reflected in the report, etc. And the other thing that I think we might be trying to tackle at that point in time is that we're going to have some notion of what the scenarios are, right? But we really want to be able to flesh out what are the pros and cons of the different ones, potentially even prioritizing these various scenarios in terms of doability. And maybe that's what we want their feedback on, so that they can feel like they're contributing in a meaningful way. And not just for that, but we really would use the inputs that we get from them in a meaningful way. And maybe that would be what we could be trying to get to by September 7th is, a list of a variety of scenarios, and we're trying to select them for the final report as to the 5 or 4 or 5, whatever it is that we are going to put in the final, recommendation area. Say, okay, depending on your appetite for taxes or services, here's the scenarios and here's the pros and cons. Please help us devise the pros and cons. That's an idea that I'm putting out there.
Thank you. Well, we do have, we will add this, I think, to next week's agenda as well. And maybe we'll have some more thoughts after our chat with the 3 boards too. So I guess we could move on to, I feel like the updates from each subcommittee have sort of been embedded in our discussion so far. As we walked through the slides, Christina, you mentioned that the interviews are ongoing for benchmarking and efficiency working group. From the school side, I'm going to meet with Chris and Jenny and talk about what the counterpart of that might look like on the school side. And Shane, I wrote down the suggestion to have a big chunk of an upcoming meeting talk about efficiencies. Anything else from that working group that I'm missing capturing? Okay, and then for budget challenges and new revenue, we got the update from Erica on the model. We're going to still use the range for the amounts on budget challenges. The new revenue information sounds like it's in the report, and Shana will take a stab at grouping them for the slides. Anything from that working group that hasn't already been captured? No. Okay, great. So those were embedded. That's great. Action items for draft schedule. I feel like this is also sort of embedded, and I don't have that handy if it's a document to bring up. Anything jump out at you, Kristen and Dan, that we should highlight?
Sorry, Valerie,
Sorry-
which document?
sorry to put you on the spot. I just feel like you guys have kept track of the schedule, draft schedule. It's on the agenda as review action items for draft schedule. Or like I said, I think it's sort of been embedded as we're planning for the 3 board meeting, the strategic retreat. We all know that we need to sort of have a draft report in the next couple weeks. So unless anything's jumping out, I guess we could just jump to the next one, which was discussion about departmental and municipal interviews. And I know some of that might not be public consumption, but if anyone that's been participating in those wants to give any update or any more help needed.
So I kind of take that,
Thanks, Christina.
at least as a first stab. So, I've probably gotten through, I would say, more than half, maybe even, I may even be sort of finishing up on some of the department interviews. I did ask Amy if she would take the library, and I know she was on vacation last week, so I haven't heard back. Because that just ended up being a really big one that I just didn't have the bandwidth to do. I've got DPW coming up Wednesday, and then I need to look back over my list because there were definitely at least 2 more that I can think of. Dispatch and facilities, and I think those department heads were on vacation, but possibly they're back now. So I wanted to set something up with them, but that won't be until next week because I only have like another day or so, and then I'm going to be on a plane for 2 days. So I think that's pretty much where that stands as far as the department heads. And then Kristen and I spoke to Chelmsford. Was that last week, Kristen?
Yeah, last week.
Okay.
And we're doing Reading today. We're doing Franklin next Monday, and I'm still working on getting a date for Acton and Westboro.
Do either one of you want to just give the rest of us a sense of, in general, how you think it's going? Are they proving to be insightful or delicate or all of the above?
Yeah, so the department head meetings have been really good. I'll be honest though, there's not a lot of efficiencies flowing out of those. You know, the budgets for the most part are pretty tight, and I sort of feel like if we're going to ask them to cut, it's going to be a level of service type of reduction. There's a few little things here and there that have come out of it, but I couldn't even put a number on it, but it's probably not super significant. And then there's a couple of bigger items that I had mentioned before, that other towns are just the way they're organized, like the facilities piece and the vehicle maintenance. And I actually, when I was talking to Chief Chambers yesterday, there's a possibility of saving some money on gasoline, like fuel for their vehicles if they refuel at the DPW. But again, we're talking in the tens of thousands. It's, it's maybe not a huge amount, but it still need to kind of flush that out and how that would really work, if it would be feasible or not. So that's kind of how that's going with the department heads. They've been great though. They've been, very forthcoming and honest. And I will say I do get from some of them a little bit of nervousness. So, just to kind of, as soon as I start out saying it's an $8 to $10 million, I usually don't have to explain much more after that. They're all kind of like, oh, okay. This is different.
Great. And you've only had Chelmsford so far, but if you want to, that's interesting to me. I just haven't been able to make those work, but if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, Kristen, I'll let you. I'm trying. I feel like I didn't quite sort of do a debrief on that in my own head. So I don't know if I really have a thought.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, my opinion is that Chelmsford runs really, really lean. They don't have a recreation department. Their police and fire staffing is much lower than Westford. They run all of their facilities together. But I think if I had to wrap it into a short description, they seem to be very lean. They have not done an override since I think 1991. And that was kind of just that's the culture of the community and the way that they want to go in. Their school buildings are quite old. Their municipal buildings are quite old, but they really attribute to the good work of their facilities department to keep that going. So they're not asking for new buildings. I think those are the big takeaways that I got from Chelmsford, and just looking forward to hearing what those other comparable communities are. But I don't think I learned anything new of like, oh, we should take that and run with it and really do that for Westford, unless I missed something totally.
The only thing that sort of springs to my mind, but I don't know how realistic it is now. So probably like 10 or 12 years ago, when Chelmsford went through their ESCO process, which I don't know if you guys know about that, like the energy performance contracting. The big piece that helped them was putting solar panels on like most of their school buildings. I think it was like 10 buildings. And that basically paid for all of their upgrades with their ESCO. So I did think that was sort of interesting. That's kind of it. But like Kristen, yeah, they run really lean. They got rid of their rec department like, I don't know, 10 years ago. It was a long time ago. Because all I could find were some expenses, and he said, nope, you didn't miss anything. That's all we have. And it was for, I forget what they have, where that actually goes, but it's very minimal.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate both of your insights. Shayna?
I was just thinking, and it's kind of a question to the group, I guess. We know that we're in a really tight spot, right? Where we're gonna have to make some really hard decisions. And I don't know if it's worth kind of having a follow-up, to the departments and thanking them obviously for their time. But also really kind of pushing a little bit for like some sort of suggestions that they can put forth to us that we can look into, because I'm not sure that we've gotten, and Christine, you could correct me if I'm wrong, like, I don't know if the word a lot of help, in trying to come up with what could we do, like out of the box thinking, like, is there anything that they can really come back? It's not ideal. No one wants to suggest anything, obviously, but I know I sat in with Erica and Christina on the meeting with the FD with Chief Targ, and it's, one of the things Erica had brought up was, is there a way to cut hours at certain fire departments in order to reduce staffing levels or OT that would save money? And I think no one wants to readily make some of those suggestions, I think, is while we're talking to them. But I don't know what the appetite or overreach, I guess, of this group would be, or maybe of Kristen as the town manager, to say, we're really grateful for all these conversations. That this is a really big task, and before we just start presenting things as a task force, do they have some suggestions, if push comes to shove, that are feasible suggestions where they could also help us evaluate those pros and cons, right? Because we could say very easily, we suggest that you limit hours to the fire department at NAB for 2 shifts, but we don't really know what that impact is. And so that would be really more fruitful for them to help us say, yes, if we have push comes to shove, these are 2 suggestions that we could do in our department. Here are the pros of doing it. You'll save money, but here are the cons that need to be considered, like response times are going to be higher. You may have upset firefighters that they don't get OT hours, things that we wouldn't necessarily think of, so that as a task force, we can come back and start talking about the things we're going to present. And I'm not sure we have enough information to do that without assistance. And then also, before I stop talking, I just really wanted to thank Christina for all of her efforts, the departments, because I think she's doing a lot of legwork there, and it's really appreciated. I wanted to just call her out for that.
Thanks. I'll echo that appreciation. And I see your hand, Dr. Chu. I just wanted to say, I think that you raise a good point. And to me, again, not to repeat myself, but it feels a little like chicken and the egg for me, because I think that as we get to whatever scenarios we are, some of those conversations are part of that service reduction conversation, right? So like what we've seen, or if you read through the Hingham report, or other communities that have wrestled with an override or this kind of gap, one of the steps in that process for an override is really to create sort of two budgets. And those are the things that really start to come up in that process. So I think some of that, it feels like we're ready for, or like we're like looking for those ideas to start coming up, but I don't know if it's just something that would be like later in the fall, as the select board, as the policymakers sort of decide what direction we'd be going in, and then it would come up. Does that make sense? Go ahead, Dr. Chu.
Thank you. I was just gonna mention that as one of the budget managers, right? I think that the challenge here is, as we go to the department heads, they are looking at their budgets every single year. And so in some ways, we are now this additional group that's coming in to audit their work, and asking them to do that. And so I feel like that's part of the challenge. So I thought Shayna, where you were talking at the end there about really just asking them to say, okay, what are the pros and cons? And you're right, it is going to impact services. We don't have people who are just spending. People are looking to see, okay, wait a second, how can they be efficient with the budgets that they have? The questions are a little bit different, right? Like for some of the departments, like I know with the school department, I know what's going to happen if we don't have the money to pay the bills that we have. And so I know the impact that it's going to have. I would be able to articulate what are the pros and cons to this. But for some of the other departments, they're looking at, okay, well, I would have to lose this and lose that and lose this, like what you had said, like the response times to things, and what would happen if you didn't have the staffing to cover that? What would that impact be? And does the community understand that? Every time we have these conversations, it ends up with people saying like, okay, well, can we look and see what the cost of paper is and things like that? And we just know that that's just not going to solve this problem. So I think there is this initial fear, which I said, Christina, I think you might have mentioned it, like there's a natural fear when we start talking about this. One of the things that I personally was struggling with was we go through a full budget process every single year. And I feel like in my tenure so far, we've been trying to address all of these things and answer all these questions and look at how we can be as efficient as possible with each cycle. So to do it right now in like a 2-week period in interviews can be challenging. So I'm just sharing that perspective at this moment in time. I don't know if I really had anything to offer other than sharing how this can be a challenging thing. And I do feel like a bigger part of our challenge as the task force is to really be looking at what these recommendations are and knowing for all of the departments that we are trying to help. We're all trying to come together to figure out what can we do to help for the future, not, hey, we're coming at you and we're now auditing you and we want to take away.
Thanks. Christina?
I think just kind of to add on to some of that, what I've sort of been picturing in my head for some of these efficiencies is almost like a trade-off table. And, there's sort of different list of items that the town offers or services that the town offers. And here's essentially the price tag. Here's, some benefits, whatever, do people want to keep that? If you do, here's the cost of it. If we decide to take that away, maybe here are some repercussions or some cons, but just so that I think the public and all of the boards sort of know, if we're looking at certain levels of service cuts, this is what this is going to look like. And do you want to pay for that? Do you want to, keep that?
Right.
Great. Here's what it's going to cost.
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that was kind of it. But, and I have a couple of ideas in my head as to what those particular things would be, and not to pick on anything, but the couple that sort of popped to my head are ambulance, only because I know that some towns do not have an in-house ambulance service. I don't exactly understand how that works when you're sort of contracting out with a private ambulance, but it's zero cost to the town. Whereas our ambulance costs, X. But of course, we probably have better response times. We have, I'm sure there's a whole list of things. But I think it sort of is probably part of our charge to say, do you, town of Westford, do you, various boards want to keep this service? Here's the price tag,
Right.
here are the benefits, here's the
Right.
whatever. You need to make that conscious decision of, nope, we want to keep that, or maybe we give that up.
I think that can be really powerful, because earlier when Erica was describing the goal of the retreat, it's and worded it as like status quo. I don't know that you just, especially if you've been in town a long time or not, like you just kind of get used to things without knowing here's how someone else does it without that, right? Or when we even from as a school committee, sometimes when people ask like, well, what about adding this other language or choosing, the choices that we've made along the way do have a cost associated with them. And that's embedded in that status quo, that term that that you used, right? So when you say, sure, I don't want to pay more taxes, but here are the choices that have led to where we are. And how would you feel if that choice is no longer an option, right? Because you also are saying you don't want to pay for an increase. So to me, I'm just really kind of struggling on like, is that something in our report now, or is that, like you said, comes out of the sort of FY25 budget process as we talk about what the outcome of I guess of the report is. So I'm really torn on it. I guess I just need to marinate on a little bit more in my head, but and I think this dovetails into diving into a little bit deeper. We're running up on this meeting's end time too. So like this combined with the efficiencies conversation, to just have these meatier conversations next Wednesday, I guess. Shana,
I was going to say to Dr. Chu's point, like, your budget, right, as a budget, being in charge of your budget. So I think part of what I was hoping for from the departments was this is going to be tight and help us propose some suggestions, because to Christina's point, we could just say, cut ambulances, there's a charge there, but we don't really understand what those ramifications are. And, I know from the call we had with Joe Targ is that he was saying that Chelmsford doesn't have ambulance, for instance, and they are having trouble getting answers to calls. And Westford's been answering their ambulance calls because the private ambulances aren't able to respond. So if we just picked cutting that, we may not get responses to our ambulance calls because there's not enough private ambulances that are staffed right now to handle the calls of existing towns that don't have them. And so I feel a little hesitant or nervous, from a task force perspective, of just kind of randomly picking things that we see in the budget items and saying, well, you could cut this as an efficiency and this would be the service. I would feel better if we had our department heads coming to us and saying, as Dr. Chu is, I am in charge of my school committee budget or my school budget. And if I need to make efficiency recommendations, like these are what I would pick. It's not going to be to just raise activity fees because there are inequity issues there. It's not going to be just to do this thing. I don't want to do it, and I'm hoping we don't have to do them all, but being the owner of that money and knowing it inside and out, if push comes to shove, these are the suggestions that I would make. And I think it's to your point, Val, and to Dr. Chu's point, is to start, they're not going to have all the answers in 2 weeks, right? But they're going to start, we want them to be really thinking about this, because there's a very real possibility that in 8 weeks, they're going to come and they're going to have to make some of these hard decisions. And that hopefully we've already started them thinking about them and starting to say, like, here are 3 choices. Here's 2 choices. This would be the top choice. This would be the second choice. These are the ramifications. And I would personally feel better to be armed for what we need to do in our recommendations at the end if we had a little bit more solidified knowledge from the people that hold the budgets and actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Kristen?
Yeah, so the budgets are due next Wednesday from departments. Perhaps as a follow-up to the email Christina sent to all the departments, Shana, you could formulate just a paragraph of like, thank you for meeting with us and providing us with this information. As you're, as you have already turned in your budget, or as you're turning in your budget, would be really helpful for the budget task force and the town manager to understand if a change were to be made, the pros and cons. Someone's head might explode and just say, oh my gosh, I can't even handle this. Like, they're going to make me change everything. So perhaps we make it a little bit more palatable and say, if you were to choose 2 things in your department that would change, what are the pros and what are cons? I don't want to, we need to get data, we need to get information, but I don't want to shut people down and blow people's budgets or thought process up. So that might be a next step as kind of a thank you and a follow-up for a little bit more information, especially because they are in this budget process, which we've started a lot earlier, related to this budget task force.
Thanks for that. Erica?
I'm just going to express a point, and I don't know what to do with it, but just in asking the department heads to come up with ideas, a huge portion of our budget is related to labor, personnel costs. Asking them to come up with things that might be the top 1 or 2 things could well be, in their eyes, throwing a colleague under the bus. I just want to put that out there. It's a super, super, super hard thing to do. If we're not asking them, Shana pointed out that I'd said, well, okay, how about we talk about, shutting down for a few hours every week, certain fire stations, right? That's because if we come up with the idea, they don't have to feel guilty about pondering it. And pondering, doing that to a colleague is hard. And so I just, if we're able to come up with questions that say, maybe this, maybe that, and then they say, well, not that, but I'd prefer to do X instead. I don't know, whatever it is. But, I think it might be good if we were able to put something out there rather than asking them to do that. It's a thought, and I don't,
I think we all agree it's very sensitive and delicate, and we're trying to be as careful and supportive as possible. Yeah.
Right, but it's also the point is that I was trying to make is that if we are able to do anything by coming up with our own ideas and saying what about, that's better.
Yeah. Point heard. Yep. Dr. Chu, and then I'm going to wrap us up.
I was just going to say that I think Kristen's point about asking for 1 idea or 2 ideas is helpful. I hear what you're saying, Erica. I do think that it is our responsibility to be able to have these buckets. And I know that we do that every year. I think what is most helpful is if I have a target, right? And if I don't have a target, then I don't necessarily know what I'm looking at. And I think that might be the bigger challenge, is that we're asking for generic efficiencies without a specific target. That makes it a little bit more harder for the budget manager to itemize, right? And that's just the reality where we are, because we don't have specific targets with what our potential revenues or potential budget challenges are. Those are just ranges as well too, but that is just another layer to this challenge. But I feel like I think at least we're moving in the right direction.
Yep. Thank you. Can I get a quick hands for who is available for next Wednesday, 12:30? That's August 16th. Okay, great. We have quorum, so let's book that as our next committee meeting. Any last comments, questions? 30-second discussions? No. Okay, great. I'll look. Oh,
Sorry, just one last thing. I was thinking when Chris was talking about the target, and I kind of just did some quick math, which Dan can double check on. And if we had to cut $8 million out of our budget, it's like roughly 6.6%. So, maybe that's a target if there's 0 other revenue coming in, but just to kind of put in
like 5%.
Some sort of perspective.
Yep. Helpful. Thank you. Maybe Shana can work that into the paragraph. Great. Thumbs up. Okay, great. We're looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second.
Second,
Thank you. Okay, all in favor? Christina,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Dan,
Yes.
Vibhu,
Aye.
Shayna,
aye.
Erica,
Aye.
Dr. Chu,
Aye.
and Jenny.
Aye.
And I am an aye. Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.